This is the Digital Marketing Experts Podcast episode. No, why am I trying to sound like a radio announcer? Experts in the Wire, episode 35. Jono Alderson. Listening to that interview was like super. I had every question kind of written out ahead of time because it's John and he's Google and I wanted to have everything prepared. I think this conversation might play a little bit more like the listeners being a fly on the wall, hearing us really meet for the first time. I've never met you. I've seen you on Twitter a little bit. I read your article. And I think it might just make for a really interesting conversation that way. So I reached out to you because you did a really interesting article called SEO Agencies Need to Focus on Expertise. And we're going to get into that. I think it's a really interesting topic for myself and a lot of listeners. Some of the call may play out. It might sound a little bit like you're giving me consulting, but I really do that because I think it makes for a very engaging episode and an interview for the listener. So before we get into that topic, let's jump back. Give me a quick rundown of who you are and what you do.
Sure. So way back in the day, I started off life as a bedroom web developer, knowing nothing about SEO, not even having heard about it. Spent years building little websites for small businesses and outgrew that, fell into agency world as the junior techie SEO in a little agency up in Leeds, which then very quickly over the course of 4 or 5 years grew to one of the largest agencies outside of London. And I ended up managing a large team of SEOs and analytics people and building up the service proposition there, doing some really cool stuff with some big clients. And this, I suppose this is where it ties into the article, is I started to become a bit disenfranchised with agency life, with the kind of compromises that you have to make on time and budget and quality in order to get things out the door. And started thinking less and less about how do we ship this today for our clients and more about how do you optimize the process and how do you start to fix some of those underlying challenges. I think in strict design and development and broader digital, it's less challenging, but in SEO, where it's changing and it's increasingly blending into broad consultancy, it's very, very hard to codify things like service propositions and build statements of delivery, etc., when it's going to be very varied and broad. So found myself getting increasingly frustrated with that, and then joined Linkdex, which, if you're not familiar with it, is kind of enterprise SEO SaaS platform, kind of large-scale rank tracking, analysis, content, etc., with the intention to use all of that data and all of that firepower to start to cut through some of those broken processes. So how much time do SEOs burn on reporting, and how much value is that really generating? And if you can skip to the output of that, which is how do I find intelligence and insight which changes my behavior? How do I discover the nugget that enables me to capitalize on an opportunity? If you can go straight to that bit, that changes the whole dynamic. It fixes the agency model, does some really cool stuff. So I ran essentially what was the consultancy arm of Linkdex for about 2 years. Sadly, we folded that as part of some internal restructuring to focus on the platform rather than all the odds and ends. And I'm now heading up our digital, I suppose, I'm on paper head of digital, but practically running the website, our social and our own SEO, and a whole bunch of kind of ECRM stuff. So I've come full journey from being web developer to technical SEO to kind of strategist and agency person, now at a meta level, kind of looking at that whole ecosystem. So interesting to come right the way through it.
Yeah, wow. And when you say going way back, about what year or time frame going way back to your web development was that?
Yeah, so I taught myself HTML when I was 13, which would have been, 98, 99.
Okay.
And then, I was doing odds and ends of freelance web development at 16, so early 2000s.
Awesome. So to make sure I understand, Linkdex now is it a software platform?
Yes, absolutely. I get shot if I describe it like this, but where Moz is kind of and they'll punch me for this as well, where Moz is kind of the cheap and cheerful end of the spectrum, we are the enterprise level. So we're used by some of the biggest brands and agencies in the world to do, if you've got a complex company that has multiple domains in multiple territories, that has teams, etc., we're designed to kind of be the right platform for that. So really large-scale, complex scenarios.
Is it akin to like a conductor?
Yeah. Again, I get shot if I describe it like that, but for the purpose of this conversation, yes. So it's reporting, it's analysis, it's rank tracking, it's content marketing, a whole bunch of other things.
Excellent. And when you did the agency work, what sort of companies were you working for?
So it started off quite small. It was we were kind of the biggest small fish in Leeds at the time, working with local SMEs. That grew very quickly, and by the time I left, we'd launched London Stock Exchange Group's new website. We were doing stuff with the NHS, some really big players. We kind of progressed all the way through. So there was a couple of years in the middle where we dealt with a lot of household brands. So we did stuff with people like Everest Home Improvements, Double Glazing Company, the whole big chunks of P&G, especially in their and Weller and their whole healthcare arm, so stuff you'll be familiar with. And we were doing trying to solve for doing everything. So the agency was originally originally design and development and build. And we grew the SEO offering out of that and grew the analytics offering out of the SEO. And increasingly it became, how do we deploy the whole thing for you? So we were taking on projects which started off with, will you build us a website, and quickly evolved into fundamental comprehensive rebuilds, including baking SEO in from the ground up and building analytics strategies and dashboards and setting KPIs and doing CRO and everything right across the board. So it was pretty diverse.
So, yeah, as I mentioned, this might play out more like a conversation. So I had sort of a framework in mind for this discussion, but you said a few things that I wanted to jump into a little bit more. Sure. So when you're talking about a company like P&G, for example, let's dive into that just for a minute or two. What sort of things, like how long is that engagement? What sort of things are you getting into? What does that kind of overall situation look like?
So that was a real culture shock for me, because having come from working with small business where it is entirely about what's the ROI I will get for every single pound or dollar invested, because they don't have huge budgets, to then move to a place like P&G where they're still kind of vaguely interested in money, but the distance between we've got a brochureware promotional website for our new hair care product and they're making money somewhere down the line is so wide that it's very hard for them to think in terms of finance. So the whole approach and all of the objectives pivot around things like mind share and reputation, with an objective of how to each of P&G's brands index against the other ones. So in lieu of having a direct commercial objective, they pit each brand against each other in a competition. They've got league tables. That was really interesting. So the work we won from them was born out of long-standing relationships with other people in the agency, and had generally started with getting creative and design work. So we'd won some design this product or this microsite, and then off the back of those conversations had said, hey, wouldn't it be a good idea if you measured how well this did? Which was mind-blowing for them at the time. And we did some really interesting stuff with cross-domain Google Analytics tracking. I think before a lot of people were doing that. So we were, whereas now you can obviously in things like Google Tag Manager quite easily do, I want to send my cookie information across domains and tie up an end-to-end journey to understand conversion. We were doing a lot of that manually because they had layers of partners and resellers and all sorts of interstitials. So we were trying to say, as a result of you having built this pretty microsite, what actually happened? And that was game changing for them.
Yeah, so this obviously sounds like it gets very complicated very quickly. So when you were helping to work for P&G, was it just you? Was there a team of people in the agency? And like, about how much effort, time, hours, resources were you putting into that sort of project?
So there's a team, so it was born out of an existing set of work. So there was a creative team who were doing things like building pretty microsites. We pitched into that relationship and said, so there's me spearheading it, a couple of account managers and some execs who essentially said, we're going to invent an analytics solution to help you understand how this is doing. And we mapped out how their ecosystem worked, how the various websites and partners were related, what the user journeys looked like, all the points where people come in and out of it, and where they ultimately spend money. and then said, what's the tech we need to deploy in order to track all of this? Some of that was just off-the-shelf stuff. Some of it was heavily butchered Google Analytics and some other bits and pieces that we, between the team, worked out, mapped out, and deployed. So yeah, maybe half a dozen or so people involved in that over the course of a couple of weeks of work, which is fairly representative. We've done, did quite a lot of that sort of thing where, for example, when Universal Analytics was first released, which was the first opportunity to really start easily tracking what happens downstream from your website. So we had a whole load of clients who the conversion point on their site would be, I want to book an inquiry. So we were doing SEO to drive traffic, doing CRO to drive conversions, but then you don't know what's happening. So we similarly came up with a whole lot of solutions to how do we build scripts and software that plugs into their website and their CRMs that pings back to analytics that allows them to say, we did this SEO over here, we optimized these landing pages here, we got these conversions, and then this came back out of it. And then you can use that to feed into things like, okay, target different keywords or change the language. Really, really cool stuff.
So you're really looking at the whole funnel of the process in the work you're doing. So let's get to the SEO side of things. I just wanted to get into the P&G because that was super interesting to me, and as far as what you did for them. But in terms of SEO, so your article, SEO agencies need to focus on expertise. I will link to it in the show notes. Cool. This is why I reached out to you, because I wanted to chat about this. So let's contextualize this entire kind of article and conversation. So in this context, are we talking about SEO and the agency relationship for these bigger types of companies, for bigger brands? Does this kind of article and conversation apply, would you say, to smaller businesses, even local businesses like dentists and lawyers and things like that? Or are we talking really about bigger brands in this context?
It's interesting, isn't it? I think it's unrealistic to expect small businesses to not rely on outsourcing execution of resource. So the idea behind the article is, in a nutshell, if you are a large and established organization, anything... I'm trying not to sound too opinionated and tell people what right and wrong looks like, but in theory, good SEO, certainly in my mind, is about building brand authority and reputation and essentially having that recognized and rewarded by search engines. So you earn that visibility, you become the brand that people want to find rather than engineering that. And the kinds of tactics and things you need to do in order to achieve that aren't the kind of things you can easily outsource. You can't outsource brand. You can't outsource reputation particularly easily. You can certainly rely on external resource to help with the tactics. But if you are an otherwise undifferentiated brand, say, I don't know, you're an insurance company and you've got a big call center, you've got a reasonably priced product, you're going to find it very hard to create differentiation and to win hearts and minds by giving money to an agency to do campaigns and tactics. Certainly increasingly hard, especially in a space where other brands are genuinely differentiating. So with that in mind, I think it's hard for small companies to do that themselves. I think there will always be a need for them to have their hands held and for people to do things which will include go and solicit some reviews for us, go and help us sort out our website, help us work out what we are. But that feels less like SEO and it feels more just like digital consultancy. And you can debate all night long where the distinction and where the line's drawn. But I think increasingly the smaller companies just need help. They don't need SEO. When they've found their feet and they've had that help and they've made their mark in the world, they should then be successful and big enough to start then doing whatever we're going to call SEO on top of that. So
excellent.
Yeah.
So this article and conversation that we're having really could apply in theory to the small company from like a dentist or lawyer all the way up to the big brands. This is applicable in every scenario, because one thing I find that's interesting about SEO is you can talk about it in generalities, but then when you get into the specific industry, or is it SaaS, is it e-commerce, is it B2B, then the discussion becomes very different, I find, among different industries. So what I wanted to jump into here was, in your article, you mentioned some terms like tactical SEO. What exactly? Well, actually, before we get to that, let's jump back quickly for a second. Historically, what did outsourcing SEO look like to an agency? So it's 2005. I'm a medium-sized company, maybe of 100 people. I need to outsource SEO. What does that look like exactly?
Sure. So certainly from my experience in that world, it was about the agency being paid a lump of money, which the client would then expect to turn into, well, depending on the level of understanding, would either say, I want X number of links for that, whether that's 100 or 1,000, with the expectation that that would turn into rankings and turn into traffic. Now, varying degrees of education, some people might just pay money for the rankings. We all know that that's not ideal. Some may start to hint towards things like quality and relevance, but really it took a long time for that to take off. So really back at that point, it was black box. It was, I will hand you a lump sum of money and you will deliver me SEO. And some kind of results associated with that. And it was a flat exchange of cash for success.
And that delivery would be somehow quantified with links or with rankings or maybe in some really rare cases, traffic.
But maybe if you're really lucky, some sales. But yeah, absolutely.
So that was kind of back in the day. And now where has things sort of shifted to? And this is where we get into with your article, is that it seems to be going... Some people are doing it, like if you look at like Seer Interactive and Will Reynolds, he talks a lot about trying to look at SEO like almost like PPC, like you give us X amount of money, we're going to give you X amount of revenue in return. That's a very kind of measurable. But then there's this other type of SEO, which is more brand and so forth driven. So where are we at today? And that might bring us to kind of the conundrum that your article highlights.
I think we're still on a journey. So we're more sophisticated than we were. It's moved away for the large part from here's some cash, get me some success. But we're still transitioning. So I think some of the best and most celebrated work I see in the space, the big successful campaigns, the kind of work that some of the very successful agencies are doing, which is driving success, which is driving quantified success, still I think has flavors of that give us cash and we'll give you success, which if you were a large search engine and your remit was to connect people from what they want or what they need to the best result for them, arguably that exchange of cash shouldn't influence that. So if I'm a large insurance company and I'm paying an agency to do me SEO, as a large search engine, I would be wanting to ignore whatever those efforts are, because arguably, again, and I'm trying very hard to not say what right and wrong looks like, 'cause it's obviously down to the individuals, but if you're paying money to be found in Google, which is essentially what's happening here, albeit through various degrees of separation and abstraction, then that's whatever the output of that is the kind of thing you would be looking to treat as spam, or if not necessarily spam, certainly the stuff you'd want to be discounting in favor of people who are there through their own quality and value. Obviously, there's a hugely grey area there where if you're a restaurant chain and your SEOs invest in training your chefs to cook better food, then it's an incredibly complex question. Is that artificial? Has it been paid for? And that question applies to a whole bunch of these circumstances, but it feels like there's a line. And I certainly think that at the moment there's a lot of people, a lot of brands buying success with things like SEO campaigns and, if not infographics, certainly big interactive pieces. And we've seen a slew recently of big interactive parallax scrolling guide microsite type things. And I think they're far and away better than what we have been doing. They're better than the 2005 version. They're better than guest commenting, but they still feel artificial. And this is the kind of crux of the article, is it feels like that kind of work is tactical, and that's done instead of arguably trying to invest in earning the value that would allow you to reap the same success that those pieces do. So should you be training the chef to cook better chicken rather than making a nice infographic about how good chicken is? So difficult. Kind of
tangibly, what you're saying here is that, and this is what happened 2, 3, 4 years ago, is a lot of SEO shifted to content marketing. Yep. The only remnants of SEO left in that, in some cases, is the identification of the keyword, perhaps, that maybe that content could rank for and earn organic traffic. But off of that, then you've got really content development and marketing and design and web development. Maybe there's so-called link building that's happening off of that content after it's published that could fall in the bucket of SEO. But largely what you're saying is this is a tactical activity from the beginning to the end. It's the creation of the content, it's the delivery of the content, and the promotion of that content. So
to get the links, which nobody says, but it's to get the links in order to get the rankings, to get the traffic, to get the sales. And it's a very nice way of paving over the fact that this is essentially link building. And I'll counterbalance that by saying it's phenomenally good PR. And in many cases, the PR that the SEO industry is doing, that I see, is better than a lot of the PR that the PR industry is doing.
Yeah.
But then it's a question of name, because actually a phenomenal interactive piece about how good chicken is, going back to my terrible example, might build brand association, it might build preference, it might build awareness, and it might create a whole load of those value signals. But it feels so much closer to PR than it does about SEO, unless you admit and say this is in order to tactically get links.
Yeah, this is where it gets kind of confused and conflated, because a company wants to hire an SEO agency, then the SEO agency comes in, and this happens to me, is I'll start working with a company and realize they have holes in their digital kind of marketing process. So then what I end up doing is filling those holes because they need to be there for SEO, but I'm not doing SEO anymore. I'm doing analytics. I'm doing content. I'm doing PR. I'm doing the stuff they should be doing anyways. So is that part of where some of the confusion is SEO is this kind of thing that needs to be built on top of existing good practices to begin with, and then the SEO finds themselves trying to fill in those gaps when they come into a company?
Yeah, and that's interesting. But then you're a broad digital consultant, aren't you? I think this is a debate we have a lot on our side. On the whole, is SEO dead? Isn't it dead? What do you call it? And the conclusion we keep coming back to is that people search, and that as a result of that search, they have an experience where they make choices and they build preference. And within that experience, there are a myriad of tools and tactics and strategies you can deploy. You can do content marketing, you can do CRO, you can do 101 other things. We need a name that sits above that describes the management of those choices and that distribution of resource and focus. And SEO is probably the best bad descriptor that we have. And it's that kind of umbrella management. But yeah, then, so you've got this world where you are firefighting and plate juggling and trying to fill in gaps in order to empower other people to achieve SEO success. But then so much of that, as you say, is analytics, is content, is getting the basics right. And then we are essentially just very sophisticated digital marketing consultants. Challenging.
And I want to go back to the analogy about training the chef to be a better chef. Is that what, and this article kind of points to this, is that what you feel an SEO agency should be providing? It that it should look more like that? It should look more like, let's get into your company and help improve the processes and the teams and the resources that you already have to work towards better SEO?
Yes, with some caveats. Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's some complexity there. So it works on assumption that the organization you're working with or in can earn that visibility in that space, and that assumes that all companies are good and stand for something. There is a challenge that most organizations who work with agencies because they struggle, or they have a skills gap, or they have a brand gap, and then so you're always going to be on an uphill struggle. But especially in those cases, yes, getting into the organization, understanding their strengths, their weaknesses, and then translating that into a strategy. So rather than saying, here is a way for us to get some links and rank better, it's got to be so much more impactful to say, we understand what differentiates you, where your value proposition is, and how we can harness that and catalyze it in order to earn you recognition, loyalty, etc. I think, however, this is where it gets challenging for us as individuals, because you are then saying add a whole bunch more skills on, and not only be an analytics person and an SEO person and a content writer and a PR, now also be a brand consultant, be a chef who's capable of training other chefs. It just becomes woefully unrealistic to have all those skills. So I think we go back to this place where we become facilitators and consultants who try and help people understand SEO in their own context. We spot the opportunities, we fight the fires, and we juggle stuff. And that feels like, from an organizational perspective, the more strategic approach. How do we how do we grow value that helps us succeed, rather than how do we pay somebody to give us day-to-day success. And there's certainly a role for the agency in that.
So let's move it to a very tangible example. And as I gave a caveat earlier, this might sound like I'm asking for consulting. I'm not. I'm just using it for an example for the listeners.
Yep.
And because it's something I've involved with, I can very easily kind of relate to it. So there's a client that we have. It's an e-commerce company, and I'd say that they're probably about 50 to 75 people, so not gigantic. They're kind of a small, medium-sized brand. They're in all the grocery stores and stuff like that, so it's a food-type product. Anyways, nice. We were brought in as an SEO agency, and they have content people that write content. They've got a company doing Facebook ads. They've got some people doing PPC, not great PPC, but they're doing it. And, all the usual things in place. In sort of your ideal situation, what should we be doing as the SEO agency? What should we, what's the actual work that we're doing for them? Are we just trying to help them figure out what their goals are? Are we doing keyword research? Are we training their writers? What actually are we doing as an SEO agency, ideally?
So I'll pivot on everything I've said, and that it may be absolutely right and appropriate if they're coasting on quite happily that you do a big infographic campaign thing that's designed to generate links. That might be exactly the right thing, but it might not, and it would be a dangerous default. I think at the highest level, what we're uniquely capable of doing, and where we are best skilled and continue to be regardless of the changing landscape, is understanding marketplaces and competitive opportunity. And actually take something like keyword research and take it to the next level and say, okay, I have a deep understanding of your brand. I know what you sell. I know your margins. I know all about your consumers and their behaviors. Now let's look broader. Let's take keyword research to a 10x level. Let's understand the entire market. Let's map out the whole market behaviors. What do people search for? What do they want? What do they do? What are the competitors doing? And then with an SEO flavor, say, okay, should we be trying to strengthen our weaknesses? Should we be trying to take market share from a competitor? Should we be moving into entirely new areas? What are the implications? Where are we growing? Where are we shrinking? That kind of level of strategic kind of market level analysis and opportunity spotting, I think, is something that we are phenomenally good at and don't do enough of, because our brains are wired to think like that and to spot those opportunities.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that, and I agree entirely. So we did find some of these keyword opportunity areas, like not markets they're not in, but certainly big buckets categorically of keywords that they're not even looking at because they were like one step above product keywords. Right. And once those are identified, I'm trying to get super tangible here. Once those are identified, should it be expected that as an SEO agency, we just say, here you go. Here's the topics, the keywords, the area that you need to be involved in? Or should the SEO agency be expected to then help execute on what needs to happen to do that? The creation of the content, the promotion of that content. And if so, is that extra billable work, like above and beyond what the agency was originally hired to do?
So there's an argument I have quite frequently with Barry Adams, which goes something along the line of, I believe deeply that our responsibility is to affect change, and ultimately, as a result, to make money for the people we work for our organizations. He's firmly in the camp that once you've made your recommendations and handed them over, your job is done. I think the truth is probably somewhere more in the middle. And in your case, I think, again, our unique ability is to understand where they'll get the best bang for their buck. And that may well be you deliver all the research, you spot the opportunity, and then you sit down and write the copy because you know the product and the brand well enough and understand how people search better than the brand might themselves. And they will get a better ROI out of you spending your time that way than they would, for example, you doing a technical audit or fixing a whole bunch of 404s. I think this is something that this is how we break this kind of slightly broken model. Is we need to get better at saying, here is the best use of my time, and rather than committing to saying, I will deliver you 100 links at the end of the month, or we will get you to first, or we will increase your traffic by 30%. actually what we're very, very good at is saying, you know what, I will constantly make micro decisions on where we are and where the opportunities are, and I will best use me and our resource to do that. And that may well be, I will write this content. It might be I'll come in and train your copywriters to write it for you. But having that fluidity, I think, is where the opportunity sits. And in this case, so keywords are higher level than the kind of product stuff. It might be, I will sit down with your developers and help work out what category level infrastructure looks like. Or it might be, we're going to go away and do a tactical kind of infographic type thing. But certainly having that flexibility to say, you're paying us X amount, we're the experts on how best to use that. And obviously you've got to pitch that kind of trust in at day one, and it's a very different way of working than what people are used to. But I think that's much closer to where we need to get to.
So part of what you're saying, and I like where you're going with this because I agree, is like the first step for SEO, or what we should be constantly doing, is figuring out the what. What should you do as a company?
Yeah.
And the trick with that, though, is we can figure out the what all we want, but some of it's dependent upon a collaborative execution with the company. How do we measure our value in the sense of, okay, we gave you the what you need to do, and then how do we tie that back to value for the client?
Yeah, getting people to do stuff's hard. So, I mean, there's a whole bunch of tactical stuff you can do around priming people and setting their expectations. So things like build out roadmaps, but build flexibility into them so you have the ability to move down multiple routes depending on what happens. Understanding the psychology of who you're delivering to and what their expectations are, and managing that. I think, again, it goes back to understanding the business, and if needs be, getting in bed with them, going and working in-house, working out what the roadblocks are and bulldozing through them, and then asking for forgiveness rather than permission. In a lot of cases, collaboration is the only way you're going to get stuff done, because people are busy, they have other priorities, they're KPI'd on things other than the things that you want. But as much as we've kind of made a mistake of focusing on rankings and metrics and being ultra tangible in a way that people can't relate to, actually you can bring people along on that. And you can, if you're having to sit down and work with developers to get them to change things, you can include them in the feedback loop of which metrics they're affecting and what the outputs were, and then make them your allies in telling the story. Because ultimately you're going to struggle to say, we did a whole load of branding and we did a whole load of work improving your processes and you made this much money. But you can absolutely weave a story where you get everybody else on board and say, look, we're all collaborating, everybody's bought in, and the more voices you have on board in that story, the more believable it's going to be and the more buy-in you're going to have.
How do you deal with sort of the challenge of, let's hypothesize and assume that we're dealing with maybe a $10,000 a month budget for SEO. How do you kind of reconcile and deal with, you're paying us X a month? And I guess my first question out of this is, how do you determine how many hours, time, energy, resources the agency puts into that? Do you like to think of an hourly kind of rate for an output of that? Or does it vary month by month? How do you think about that in terms of the time that you put into the work?
So I don't have an answer for this, and it's something I'm struggling with and trying to come up with some interesting options, because I think that as soon as you start down that road, you change your behavior. So if you had an unlimited budget and or unlimited time, you would look for the best opportunities and do the best work until it's done. As soon as you start moving into this model, you are tied to working in terms of months. And every month you have to have a meeting, and for every meeting you have to bring a PowerPoint presentation, and behind that you have to have a report, and you have to say, this month I have done and completed X and Y and Z. And suddenly you're in a position where you're doing the work to fuel the process rather than the work that's going to make the difference. And there are some ways you can avoid that trap. You can attempt to work in terms of projects rather than ongoing rolling stuff. But then you end up in this world where you're producing big infographics and campaign microsites rather than fixing businesses. I think this is something where you can take a leaf out of the book from other channels who we've historically laughed at and taken the mick out of. Go talk to the PR guys, talk to the above the line guys. find out how they get buy-in and how they justify their value, because the PR guys don't work to month stuff in the same way that we've shackled ourselves to, and it feels like it's a bit of a legacy of I will deliver you 100 units of links per month for X dollar. I think the sooner we can find a way to break out of that, the easier we'll find it to prove our value, because if we're doing the wrong kind of work, it is very hard to prove that it's generating value.
Yeah, because on the flip side of that, the other challenge is sometimes a client will actually ask for how many hours they get for X budget. And I struggle with this because, of course, there's a rough idea of hours. And there's pros and cons to deciding that. As one, the pro for the client is that, well, okay, they know they got a certain amount of our time, attention, whatever. But on the flip side, maybe we could have accomplished something really great in 5 hours, but now we need to check off another 5 hours to get to 10 hours. So do you see a benefit, or maybe not a benefit, for a client to think in that manner?
Well, going back, this is, again, part of my motivation for moving to Linkdex several years ago to try and fix some of this is that... what am I saying? Sorry, my brain has just gone completely blank. Essentially, the agency model at its very heart is based on the idea of scalable resource, that you have a number of highly skilled people whose time is built out and split between a certain number of clients, and you need to maintain and scale that in order to protect your monthly run rate, your income, etc. And that in many, many cases, there is a conflict between the number of people you have, the hours you're billing, what you've committed to deliver, and the quality and the time, and so on and so forth. And you find yourself trying to juggle those aspects. I think where you can start to make that work is by becoming radically more efficient in some of the executional and tactical things. So things like reporting is, if you remove all of the tedious overheads from those 5 or 10 hours, suddenly that's productive time and you can start to use it much more effectively. Whereas if you're having to commit up front to, we will give you 10 hours per month of time, it's very, very easy for you to pad that and fill it with things like reporting and meetings. And you end up changing your behavior to align to that rather than doing what needs doing. And then you become just another agency delivering more tactical stuff.
Yeah, one thing I find myself doing that's very hard to kind of control is giving more time each month to each client just because of wanting to do the extra effort or to make them happy, or appeasing, the squeaky wheel getting the grease scenario where, the client that's emailing all the time is the one getting more attention. And sometimes, unfortunately, they might get a little more attention than a client that has a higher budget. So those things are tough to reconcile as well. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts around that. And maybe this boils down to even more of a personal productivity situation. How do you try to contain that time so it doesn't start expanding, and then you don't have time for any client because you're spread too thin?
I find, from my experience and talking to others, I think working on site is a huge help with this. So rather than saying we're going to go away, work for X hours over the course of a month and deliver your bits, which then gives permission to essentially chip away at stuff and email endlessly, if you are arranging to be physically sat there and you've scheduled meetings and you essentially get the requirements to come to you en masse, you get the economies of scale of that, of having all the right people in the right discussions at the same time. It makes your value a very real and tangible thing, and the fact that it's then finite means that it feels more valuable. And then if it starts to go over, you can say, well, I'm going to come in and do this in the office, but that's going to be another day. You can make it feel more real rather than you being an anonymous person at the end of an email you're just delegating tasks to. That kind of idea of being part of the organization or involved with the organization that you're working for and delivering to takes away a lot of that anonymity. Obviously, that's quite hard when you're talking about dealing with lots of smaller clients, but there's a threshold where it makes sense to do that.
Yeah, I love that suggestion for going in-house. And certainly people that live in the bigger cities like New York, San Francisco have an easier time at doing that. It's something that I'm trying to make an effort to do more myself. So we might have touched upon this a little. I'm going to pull out a quote from the article, and then I want to see really tangibly kind of what we can extract from this. So the quote is, you say, furthermore, the agency can build and bill against a commercial and deliverable model which makes sense based upon the resources and value it's delivering, rather than being tied to a model which no longer makes sense as an operating and billing framework. A more collaborative approach with tailored agreements and commercials breaks us out of the vendor-client trap. And I think we kind of went into that a little bit, but like tangibly, what can we extract out of this? And are you saying that kind of the monthly retainer model is broken? Should we look at other payment models? What are we looking at here tangibly?
I don't necessarily think it's broken, but I think it's a dangerous default, and it's dangerous not to challenge it. So in the same way that, as part of us moving away from a world where we had agencies with large teams of people doing link building essentially in a basement on minimum wage, the model we're working to now was in large designed to fit that kind of labor force and use of resource. It was, I have a team of people, I need to understand my overheads are this cost, my links per day from all the spam I'm doing is this, therefore I will charge this for this amount of hours. We're still in a similar commercial model to that. It's still based on monthly deliverables, whether that's links, whether it's rankings, whether it's traffic. We're still doing monthly meetings and reports. I think certainly there is an opportunity to challenge that and to say, I'm not a commoditized resource that you're buying. You're essentially renting my expertise on time. And that might be applied in terms of me writing copy. It might be me training the chef. It might be me sitting down with your developers. But what you're really purchasing is me helping to catalyze your performance. Therefore, let's consider how that might be compensated. It might absolutely be a monthly retainer, but certainly there's an opportunity to say maybe it's based on performance with some kind of with the caveat that you would definitely want to have your analytics sorted before you went down that road. Maybe it's based on commission. Maybe it's based on 100 other models. Maybe it's a flat fee. Maybe it's daily. But certainly we should be considering that in a world where good SEO looks like increasingly strategic kind of vision management and support and education, maybe monthly retainers from the old agency model aren't the right fit.
Yeah, interesting. It makes me think that we could learn a thing or two from just general business consultants.
Yes. Certainly something we've talked about at Linkdex is increasingly, so we're working with some of the big consultancies, and they're starting to understand the implications of kind of managing large-scale search. And they're teaching us all sorts about how they work and consult with other organizations, the way they think, the way that they spend their time. It definitely feels like the next generation of SEO looks more like the consultants of the world and less like the kind of the stereotypical link builder in a basement.
So I want to jump to a slide share that I really love called Product Marketing by the Numbers that nice. You published a little while ago, I think in 2015. I have a few specific questions off of this, but first of all, and I'll link to it in the show notes, everyone can go check it out. It's a really great slide deck.
Thank you.
It's funny, but there's a few little jokes in there, but there's some really practical things. What's the gist of this slide deck first? It's called Product Marketing by the Numbers. What's the gist of it? So
back in agency world, again, I kind of started to take out some of my frustrations on the dysfunctions in the model and started to try and work out how you systemize and optimize this whole ecosystem. So I was looking at why don't stakeholders sign off budget? Why don't teams agree on priorities? Why is everybody panicking when bounce rate goes down 2%? Why don't we have any targets? How do we articulate our strategy? All of these things, and over the course of 4 or 5 years, was cherry picking bits of reading, bits of processes, bits of thinking, and started to hybridize them into a framework. And so I eventually got to the point where I'd hybridized and butchered a whole lot of stuff that was based largely off a framework by Avinash Kaushik of Web Analytics 2.0 and a whole bunch of other stuff, which attempted to connect the highest level of an organization, so the CEO, the senior stakeholders, and their vision of how the world works and what the business is doing and what good looks like, down to the practical, tactical, metric-driven world of what are we doing today, how many units have we sold, what's our ROI, because they speak different languages. And they think differently and they have different priorities. And I, in agency world, saw so many examples of just complete dysfunction between the two, where the guys on the ground didn't understand the company vision, the guys at the top didn't understand what conversion rate meant, and they were unable to work together to chase success. And as a result, everybody was always angry, everybody was always confused, everybody always wanted more. You ask what everybody's trying to do, and they just say sell more units, somewhat, and there's no sophistication to that. So I kind of built this framework that's designed to bridge those worlds, and it starts from the premise that you want to understand what the CEO and the senior people see the world to be and what's their use of language, what do they work with, and then you work back from that to how do we talk about specific metrics and KPIs and get everybody on board and get everyone on board and to agree it, so you've got a single unified vision of what success looks like and what priorities look like.
Yeah, I love this slide deck. And you talk about the HEART framework. Is this something you came up with, or is this an existing? No,
that's Google. Google, the HEART one. If it's not Google's, it certainly was used by Google for a while. They talked about it quite passionately. So the HEART framework's a kind of a slightly more simplistic model, but it's nice, and it's one of the things this achieves is, rather than everybody talking about how many things have we sold and what's our ROI, it forces you to be a bit more user-centric and say, what's the experience our customers are having and our users are having? How well are we doing in acquiring new users? How are we doing on retention? How do people feel? And that's really powerful because it obviously correlates with other good behaviors like spending money and not going to competitors. And it's a really good starting place. I think one of the things that they touch on is this concept of task completion rate as a metric, which is so powerful. So rather than looking at bounce rates and exit rates and time on page and things which give you indication of how well people are doing, actually it's really powerful just to ask them outright and say, what were you trying to do with some predefined options? Were you able to do it, yes or no? And then actually bolt on satisfaction rate as well. So say, how would you score your experience out of 10? And what you get then in your analytics view in your world is, for example, we have a whole bunch of people who landed on this page from this channel who said they were trying to find out about this product, who were dissatisfied. And then all of your kind of tactical day-to-day work can be prioritized around fixing for failed visits and unhappy people. Hugely, hugely powerful. Where the HEART framework fails is it steps too far away from the kind of commercial world. In that you still need to understand how many things have I sold and how much money have I made, which is kind of where my structure comes in, is it reintegrates them both, and you get to a point where you can balance them. So you've got everybody essentially singing off the same hymn sheet. So you avoid a scenario where the CEO says, it's really nice that people are happy, but we're losing money, because you've got it all together.
Yeah, I feel like this chart here, and I pulled it up and I'll link to the exact page in the show notes. It's the one where at the top you have objective, goal, KPI, key segments, yes, performance. This chart is fascinating and really cool. And I feel like this will help me with so there's a certain client that I have, a bit bigger than the other client I mentioned, maybe pushing towards 200 people, SaaS company, startup. They have a B2C and a B2B, both kind of facing segments of the company. Something I hear very often that trickles down to me, from the CEO down to the marketing, the VP of marketing, down to the marketing operations person, is the CEO wants this one metric of our SEO health. We want one SEO health metric. And I struggle with that because, part of me says, okay, well, let me just kind of like, this month you have a C-, just like make it up.
And then they say, what's that mean?
Yeah.
And then you're right back to the same conversation.
And part of me struggles with, okay, they want this, they, and I get it, right? The CEO wants in 5 seconds to know how's the health of our SEO. But I struggle with that because is that really helping them at the end of the day? And I feel like the bullet charts you have on the right here under performance, I was hoping you could explain these a little bit more. I sort of get the sense that this sort of framework with that bullet chart at the end might be a good way to communicate something like that.
Yeah, so the bullet charts are so awesome. Happy to describe, but I'll give it a shot. So essentially what you've got is a horizontal bar chart that has thresholds of performance. So let's take something like bounce rate, for example. I can't count the number of meetings I've sat in for a monthly review where bounce rate has gone up 2%. And we've spent 20 minutes talking about why that might be and is it significant with the same people week in, month out. And it's a waste of time because as an intelligent analyst, you know that a 2% shift in bounce rate is utterly insignificant.
Yeah.
How do you control the behavior of the people who are receiving that? So you introduce the concept of thresholds. As you say, actually, as long as it's between 60 and 70, we don't care. So this is where the bullet chart comes in, is you take a horizontal bar chart and you say, what are the thresholds of performance? What does bad look like? What does okay look like? And what does good look like? And where are we? And also, where's our target? So if it's at 90%, we're in the bad zone and somebody needs to get fired or told off or something needs to happen. If we're at 50%, we've hit our golden point and everyone gets champagne. So in a very small amount of space, you can say, how are we doing? Do I need to react and investigate further or ask any more questions? And are we smashing it? And are we meeting expectations? You can convey all of that in no space at all in a way that everybody can understand. I think the power of this framework is combining that against the kind of the vision statement as well. So you get, our objective is to be the best. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, well, it means that we have the highest satisfaction score. Okay, what does that mean? It means that we do well on these metrics and we are at 60% of that target. And you can convey the health of the whole ecosystem in that. You've then also got the relationship between them. Is if you don't want to be in a position where your reputation is going up, but your sales are going down. Everybody likes us, but we're losing money. So it forces you to balance these activities and it gets everybody playing together.
Yeah. So is this type of chart here something you're thinking that an SEO agency would actually help develop? Or is this way beyond, we now in digital strategy, business strategy land?
I think we are in business strategy land, but I was doing this as an SEO for the companies we were doing SEO for because they didn't have anything. And part of the deck in the lead up to this chart in this deck acknowledges the fact that most organizations struggle to articulate what their strategy is. And I think to be an SEO company or an SEO agency or a practitioner, to be trying to do SEO without an understanding of what the organization's strategy is going to cause you challenges. It's going to mean that you're kind of stuck in that tactical world that you can't do the big thing. So
sorry to interrupt, but this analogy comes to mind, and I feel like this gets tangibly to the heart of kind of the conundrum here. If we're an SEO agency brought in to do SEO and then we're developing this big business strategy, isn't it kind of like we're the lowest rung contractor, like screwing the bolt on the thing, but we come in and architect the entire skyscraper? And aren't we selling ourselves short in that kind of way to come in as, the guy screwing the bolt on the steel beam, but then we develop the whole architecture plan for the entire building?
Yeah, and I think we don't shout about that enough. I think our typical response is to go. So we know we pitch for businesses. We go in and we know that there will be gaps. We know that the content will be terrible. We know that they've done terrible link building historically. We know that they won't be able to articulate their strategy, and we sigh and we suck it up and we get on with filling in the gaps rather than challenging it and saying either, you know what, we're going to need more resource, we're going to need more money, we're going to need more time. These are the kind of things, in fact, I do have a trick for this actually, is this is the kind of thing that you can anticipate. And one of the things we toyed with at Linkdex for a while that didn't get particularly very far, but I still want to pick up at some point, is the idea of trying to catch these things before you get trapped. So we played with psychometric testing of stakeholders. As you can do things fairly early in the pitch and an onboarding process where you might survey the senior people at the organization and say, what do you think the gap between your ambition and your capability is? And also ask the junior people and say, how well resourced are you to hit your targets? And ask all sorts of people in different roles across the organization as much as you can, and then look for disparity. And if the senior people say, we're going to rock it, we're well on target, and the junior people say, we're drowning for lack of resource, you can probably spot some of these issues. And then when you're going to the negotiating table to say, here's what our SEO retainer will look like, here's what we're going to do, you're going to say, also, we anticipate that your content guys are already drowning, therefore we're going to need more resource here, or we're going to need to pivot our strategy to not rely on that because we know there's a gap. So you can spot some of this up front and then take control of it, rather than getting 3 months into a relationship, realizing that you're going to have to wear the PR hat and the content hat and the tech hat and so on.
Is that troubling for a business that they go into it thinking, we're going to hire an SEO agency for X a month? The SEO agency comes back and says, well, you really need that times 10. So yeah. Is that challenging as well, when the budget that comes back might not at all, and the needs that come back might not be at all what the business expected?
Yeah, and there's two things. I think that there's a broad educational challenge that needs to happen, which is happening slowly, thankfully, as we as kind of brands work through this 2005 legacy and work with new agencies and get better educated. That it's much bigger than they anticipate. This isn't something you can spend X thousand a month on and solve it all because it speaks right to the heart of an organization. The other thing I found helps to make clear right at the very, 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 very beginning of any conversation is that it's not a commodity deliverable, it's a journey, and it's a partnership, and it's a collaboration, and it's a journey that realistically you're probably only ever going to get 10 steps through on a set of 1,000 steps. Not that those 10, you're going to make significant impact, but there's going to be hard choices, finite resource, and an infinite amount of things to do. And if you position it with those expectations, that becomes easier. And it might be that their answer is, we only have a finite amount of budget, we can't do all of this, in which case, again, going back, we are the people who are most capable of saying, okay, within these constraints, here is the best use of our resource. Again, that might be training the chef, it might be writing the blog posts. You cherry pick.
Part of me, and just to tie things up here to go completely on a hard left angle turn here, part of me, because I come from I was a musician, artist, creator type of person, not this sort of analytics driven person initially. I mean, my dad's a sculptor, right? Like, I came from the art world.
Wow.
Part of me sometimes just thinks, well, I want to just throw all that analytics number stuff away and make really great content, have great do all of these things that, existed before the internet existed, when people were just having great products and a good experience and good customer service, and let the chips fall where they may. Do you sometimes find yourself in that mindset as well? You just want to throw all this analytics stuff aside and just sit down and make a great piece of art, a great piece of content?
Yes, and I think it's a huge flaw in our current ecosystem that speaks to how young Google still is and how flawed the ecosystem is, that if you are an artisanal watchmaker, that you also have to be a great content marketer in order to be found, to be discovered, to sell in their ecosystem. And that feels criminal, that the people who are genuinely artisanal provider, who make incredible products, who deliver incredible services, also have to be other things, also have to be able to build and or manage a website, also have to be able to afford and or manage a PPC account, which either suggests that they are incredible polymaths or that we're getting a diluted version. And actually, the truly great providers aren't hitting our radar. Having said that, I think in a world before the internet, those people still would have had to have built a reputation. They still would have had to have advertised in the yellow pages or networked at events. And I think actually what we're seeing is a massive evolution of that, which unfortunately, due to the limitations of the system, has allowed everything to become commoditized. And what we've ended up with is this kind of poor version where we end up with a mediocre version of everything based on who can afford to do an okay job and advertise and manage a website. But those are the only people there. And there's still phenomenal providers and people who make things and do things who don't get nearly the exposure they should because the system is broken.
Yeah, totally agree with that. So I feel like I kind of want to tie things up a little and circle back to the beginning of where this whole thing started. So your article actually came about because a guy, and I have no idea how to pronounce his name, Kodrat Turkano.
Yeah, Kodrat, yep.
Yeah. He even tweeted me this question about what should in-house market. So your article started because of his tweet. He said, hey, what should in-house marketers look for when hiring an SEO agency, and what should they avoid at all costs? He actually asked me that question too, independently of yourself. My short tweet answer to him was, look for understanding of the business and good communication. It's a very personal thing. You may want to try a project first. That was my quick answer, not even knowing that you had answered him as well. How can we circle back up and tie this up in sort of a neat bow, if possible? How could we answer for the client wanting to hire an agency? What should they look for?
I think first and foremost, you need a partner who is going to work with you, not for you. And that might mean anything. It might mean tactical outsourced link building. It might mean strategic consultancy. It might mean a whole bunch of things, but somebody who's going to sit down, work with you to understand the business, the market, the opportunities, and to make the right decisions on how they should spend their time and your money. And I think there's a risk in anybody who has anybody who you're going to pay money to and then see in a month's time where they're going to say, here's what we've delivered to you, because there's consider what Google are trying to achieve, and consider what good branding looks like and good reputation. That's very, very hard to deliver as a thing at the end of the month. So people who are going to work with you as a partner.
So I love that the short answer kind of sounds like, look for a partnership, not a commodity.
Yeah.
I like that. Nice. And I totally agree. So, and very lastly, what would you say to the agency that is looking to get new clients? What should they, is that how they should think of themselves, as a partner and collaborator with their clients?
Yeah, definitely. And to demonstrate understanding of the businesses and the markets, because you pointed out earlier that certain verticals behave very differently to others, that businesses all have unique challenges. There's no point going in pitching, we will write you blog articles, if what they actually really need is to have their chef trained. So look for opportunities for synergy, to align your strengths to their weaknesses, look for good fits, and look to be a collaborator, not a provider. I
like it. So to kind of wrap things up, this has been a great conversation, by the way. I can't wait to publish it. I'm actually publishing it later today. I've been doing that. So John's interview with John Mueller, I recorded it and published it that very same day. We're going to do that here today. Jono, where can people find you online, Twitter, website, so on and so forth?
Sure. So Twitter at Jono Alderson, that's JONOALDERSON, or linkdex.com or jonoalderson.com, and all the usual places like LinkedIn, etc. And Brighton SEO and a whole bunch of other conferences.
Excellent. Well, it's been great meeting you and talking with you today.
Likewise.
So enjoyed it, and we'll see everyone next time on Experts on the Wire. Thanks, Jono.
Thank you.